Hey folks, Zach Otten here. I'm Insider Indianapolis Star. He is Mike Niziolek, Bloomington Herald Times. This is Mind Your Banners for Tuesday, September 10th, 2024. It's Big Ten. I guess it's Big Ten opener week. It feels weird in a way, Mike. I feel like I've covered so many seasons in the last few years where the Big Ten opener was the season opener. I'm not accustomed to the idea that week one isn't a Big Ten game, but in this particular case, it's not. Indiana's 2-0, headed to UCLA on Saturday afternoon, local time, evening, Indiana time. UCLA 1-0, probably fair to say a little bit less convincing than Indiana thus far this season, but small sample sizes either way. We'll start with Western Illinois. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but it was a record-setting performance for Indiana. Was it 701 total yards? Or was it 709 total yards?
I don't know
And
one, yeah.
and 77 points, both single game records against any opponent ever for Indiana. The margin of victory second only to what was previously the single game points record, 76 points in a 76-0 win over Franklin in 1901. I know you covered that game. I think I was still in high school when that was played. Um, you know, there's not a lot you can do with it if you're Indiana with a game like Western Illinois except win it, but basically the only way you're going to impress people is if you win it the way they want it. And I think we said that in some shape or form in the pregame press conference that they would have to be outstanding, like remarkable in that game to really turn heads. And to be fair, Indiana kind of was.
Yeah, and Kurt Cignetti was pretty pleased overall. I think the only thing he was really kind of on Monday kind of upset about was some mistakes in the secondary that he thought they could have taken advantage of. That Western Illinois didn't, and wanted to get those cleaned up for UCLA. But I mean, he was very pleased. Sort of, it met his threshold, right? Like the overall effort, the overall intensity, and he said that was going to be a challenge just because of how bad this team was. And 25 losses in a row. Average margin of defeat upwards of like 30 to 40 points a game during that stretch. But they didn't let down. And all the reserves came in and held that standard up too.
Again, these are small sample sizes and the opponents are what they are. I think the thing that carried over most for me was, this sort of week 1 to week 2 challenge of, we heard Curt Cignetti talk about the Florida International game. They roll up 3 straight scoring drives. They're up 21-0. And then he feels like maybe, I think in his words, they kind of lose an edge, they suddenly kind of stall out offensively. And he feels like maybe it's because they just get a little complacent. Maybe you start playing the game thinking it's going to be easy, and they just stop executing so well. And obviously they win that game comfortably. I think they covered or were close to it. I forget where the FIU line closed, but the challenge, as you said, I think you told me that Curt Cignetti said, like, during his coaches show Thursday night, he almost immediately was like, this is a battle against human nature. Like, he wasn't even kind of entertaining the idea that Indiana, needed to fear anything Western Illinois was going to try to do, so much as Indiana needed to fear its own, capacity for some kind of letdown. And the fact that, as you say, Indiana scored on 9 of its first 10 drives, all scores touchdowns. The only one of those 10 Indiana didn't score on, it was intentionally taking a knee and running out the clock in the first half. So that drive kind of doesn't count. First team, second team, there was no let up after halftime. If there's, no matter who you're playing, if basically the worst sort of technical critiques you can put on the table, or that there were some breakdowns in the secondary a better team might have exploited, and the fact that you gave up a field goal, you feel like Indiana answered the bell on its coach's sort of challenge to not fall into that sort of complacency mode, so to speak. And again, that's all you can prove in a lot of ways from a game like that if you're Indiana, but they did so emphatically. You have to give them credit for that.
Well, yeah, the defense forced 3, the second half, the reserves forced 3 turnovers in a row, scored on one of them. Everybody sort of got in the action. Taven Jackson sort of showed that maybe he's doing, this coaching staff has unlocked something a little bit with him, and he's improved. You got all the quarterback, all the scholarship quarterback snaps. I mean, what more can you ask for in terms of um, if you're playing inferior competition? That's what you want to do. You want to make the game the runaway sort of blowout and get everybody on the field, and they did. I mean, literally, they emptied. I think Kurt Zaghetti said that we emptied the entire bench.
Did Cherry get snaps?
Yeah.
Mendoza did. Okay, Cherry got on the field. I must have missed that at the end. I think you're also encouraged by, I mean, obviously Curtis Rourke was really good. There's been a lot of stuff circulating. I think PFF had him as one of like the top 10 graded quarterbacks in the country last week. And again, the opponent is what it is, but especially after maybe a bit of a halting start in the passing game in week 1, to feel like you cleaned some of that up in week 2. Once again, we talked about this after week 1, and Indiana was really only better at it in week 2. You feel like you're seeing the sort of the underpinnings of the defenses at James Madison, what made them so successful. You feel like you're seeing some of that show up, the penetration up front, the ability to control the line of scrimmage, sacks, tackles for loss. Obviously you're always going to want those things to lead to more turnovers, but in general, just sort of negative plays, havoc plays. And then the other thing that strikes me, because we talked a lot, at least it feels like I spent a lot of my time focusing on the pass game in the offseason because they take a high profile quarterback transfer. They retain Donovan McCulley. They bring in some high profile receiver transfers. You obviously look at what Kurt Signetti's offenses were able to do in Harrisonburg and before that at Elon. I don't know if I spent enough time thinking about a running back room that now, I mean, you got 3 of the 4 running back transfers have scored at least 1 touchdown. You feel like you're seeing very little drop off, so far when Indiana cycles from one guy to the next in that rotation. It was Tyson Lawton a couple weeks ago. Last weekend, obviously, it was Justice Ellison. And so the point is, it feels like a running game that is almost going to be healthy by depth, or at least has the capacity to be. And that's maybe one of those things that I don't know if maybe I was just alone in this, but I probably did not sort of lend enough time to consider or to evaluate in the offseason what that might bring to Indiana's offense, essentially.
Yeah, to your point about the Rourke, I think the most encouraging thing was, and for the passing game in general, he was 3 of 3 on throws of 20 yards or more, and I think he was only 1 of 5 in the opener, and they were 5 for 5 as a team. And so I thought that was sort of the biggest step forward, that they were able to take advantage of some of the things over the top, and kind of create those explosive plays, because you didn't see that in the opener. As for the running game, look, they're averaging 278.5 yards per game. Last year, they averaged 120. They've almost scored as many touchdowns on the ground through 2 games as they did all last season. Now the test is here, right? Like the defensive front of UCLA's still pretty good, or that front 7. I think they run a 3-4. And so let's see if that continues, right? They've run, they've had so many explosive plays on the ground. Let me see what they got. They've got 20 runs of 10 plus yards and 4 of 20 plus yards. They only had 5 of 20 plus yards all of last year. So you can kind of see the production and what they've been able to do. But I think it needs to carry over this week if you're really going to start talking about this, as something that could sort of carry the team, as opposed to, look, they did what they needed to against weaker competition.
No, I think that's fair. And I guess let's turn to UCLA because just generally speaking, I don't want to place too much emphasis or weight on Western Illinois. You bring up that defense, and it has kind of carried over. I know you asked Kurt Signetti about that. There were some tweaks. I think he said they're a little more aggressive in some spots, but the general scheme has carried over through the coaching change. I also just feel like quietly that's, maybe I don't know if people in like Big Ten country have picked up on this, but like it's also just kind of quietly been one of UCLA's sort of a piece of their identity. You think about how many athletic linebackers have come through UCLA in the last few years, guys that were kind of that tweener that allowed you to play what you might call a 3-4, but could easily turn into 4 down linemen or 3 down linemen with a really, really talented rush end. Um, it does feel like it's, this matchup specifically, obviously any Big Ten matchup compared to Western Illinois is this is going to be the case. But I do wonder if this is going to be the kind of game that challenges Indiana from a speed and athleticism point of view a little bit more. I don't want to say, not that Big Ten teams can't be physical, but almost more that, it might not be something where Indiana's going to have to go establish a certain level of dominance in the trenches so much as Indiana's going to have to handle, some athleticism, some speed, maybe some length in certain positions that, that they're not, that they certainly haven't seen so far this season. And I'm not sure how many times in the last couple years in the Big Ten they'd have seen it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I was kind of looking up some of the stats from the opener for UCLA. They had 5 sacks, 11 tackles for loss. They really got after it. And I think when you saw Curtis Rourke in that opener, sort of them having trouble with pass protection, um, uh, you know, I think that's kind of the concern. Is the offensive line going to hold up against this kind of defensive front that's going to bring a lot of pressure? And you don't have a ton of film on. I think that'll be sort of interesting to see how everybody holds up there. And talk about speed. I mean, Kurt Signetti mentioned kind of the speed on the other side in terms of their skill position players, their top receivers, that Notre Dame transfer, Rico Flores. He had 100 yards in the opener and a touchdown. So that'll be sort of for the defense, especially that secondary. That's been sort of up and down a little bit to sort of answer the bell.
To give people a sense for where I guess the analytics are on this game, I know it kind of ran around, I think IU football Twitter at least, that Indiana jumped like 40 something spots in the ESPN FPI. Indiana is, I'm looking, I don't think they haven't, is there a way to cycle back? I don't think there's a way to cycle back through last week, but it was 40 something spots. Indiana's up now at 26th nationally. If you look at just kind of like the way that the formula aggregates numbers, they've got Indiana going 8-4. UCLA, I think, was in the 40s in the FPI. I know they were in the S&P Plus. They've only played the one game. They didn't look great at Hawaii. They'd hardly be the first team that made that trip. Time change, week 0 or week 1, all that weirdness, and didn't look great out on the island. They did win. They're 60th in FPI. Interestingly, and UCLA was down in the, I want to say in the 40s, maybe 45, 46 in the S&P Plus in the preseason. Indiana was 81st. If you look at S&P Plus this week, Bill Connolly's formula, this is UCLA is 53rd, Indiana is 54th. So there's been maybe a little bit of regression from UCLA. That's going to be the nature of the way they won the Hawaii game. And also, frankly, the fact that they haven't played the kind of empty calorie, FCS opponent that would allow them to go out there and name their score a little bit the way Indiana did and inflate some of their metrics. But Indiana has jumped from 81st to 54th. So listen, like analytics are in general, you should never make too many generalizations, but it is probably fair to say most analytical formulas will bend toward teams that are hyper efficient, regardless of sort of who that efficiency is gained against. So if Indiana's winning by 74 points, it kind of doesn't, there's an extent to which the formula is just going to, eat that up no matter kind of who the opponent is, no matter how much you can adjust for opponents. So some of these numbers could be a little bit inflated by who Indiana's played so far. But I mean, I think it is fair to say, particularly if you subscribe to the S&P Plus, which, longtime listeners know I do, this has moved firmly kind of into one of those games that feels like, and every conference has these, there's sort of like a wheat from chaff, kind of sorting process at this point in the season in terms of you get to a place where the analytics say these are probably the elite teams in your conference, these are the really good teams in your conference, and then behind them, these are the teams that should make a bowl game in your conference. And this feels kind of like one of those games where Indiana either, breaks one way or the other in terms of, separating itself from the teams that are just going to miss out and entrenching itself in that group that's going to kind of stay in control of its own destiny for most of the fall.
Yeah, and we thought that's where Indiana kind of belonged. Once this kind of the dust settled and people got to see what this new roster looked like. I mean, I do think obviously there was some questions about how all the sort of lower level transfers would acclimate, and this is their real first, I guess, test at Power Four competition now. But they sound motivated. Mikel Kamara, who has 3 sacks and is leading the team sort of defensively. I mean, didn't sound like he was worried that this wouldn't translate over to Pasadena when we talked to him on Saturday night.
Ethan Garbers is UCLA's quarterback. He is the rare guy that's been at one school for a while. He wound up, I think he kind of, I want to say he kind of moved into that job at the back end of last season, if I'm not mistaken. He threw 12 passes. I'm looking at his stats now. Yeah, by the end of basically he has a stretch there from October 21st to November 18th where he's pretty aggressively getting worked out in the passing game. He only attempted 21 passes over their last 2 games, a loss to Cal, and then the bowl game against Boise State. I'm not sure if he was injured. Um, but the point is, I mean, he has been around UCLA for a while. He's not a transfer. This is his 4th year there. He was 19 to 38 for 272 yards, a touchdown, and 2 picks at Hawaii. Again, Hawaii is always kind of a funny program to try and sort of compare teams to because you do have that long trip. I know it's not quite as big of a time zone change if you're coming from LA, but it's a more substantial sort of travel than, I guess it's probably not more substantial than what Indiana's doing this weekend. But it is kind of a weird, week one. It's an environment that can be difficult sometimes. Um, and if nothing else, you've got a quarterback who is pretty comfortable with what Power Five football, or I guess Power Four football now looks like. This is kind of the first time you mentioned Kamara. Obviously, he's been at the center of how disruptive these defenses have been. I think you corrected me on this earlier in the week. He's got 3 sacks, not just the 2. Um, this was probably the kind of impact Indiana was hoping for when it brought him over from James Madison. He had a really good year last year, and I think there was kind of a lingering belief that he could be even better this season. This is the kind of game where it does feel like you need guys like that um, to really kind of give you a chance to make some plays on defense because you've got a quarterback that on the one hand isn't necessarily going to be rattled. On the other hand, is hardly mistake averse. Garber's thrown 9 picks over the last 4 years. He's thrown 5 picks over his last 184 attempts. That's not a horrendous number, but that's roughly an interception a game or so. The point is he can be forced into a few mistakes. He was also sacked about once every, I'm doing the math in my head, which is always dangerous, about once every 13, 14 dropbacks last year. So, or well, I guess attempts. I guess I don't know what the difference between dropbacks and attempts, but according to ESPN, he had 146 attempts and 12 sacks. So that's about once every 12 attempts he was sacked last season. If you can force him into a situation where he's attempting 38 to 40 passes, that's, in theory, 3 or 4 sack opportunities that you can get on a guy that maybe has struggled a little bit to avoid those at times in the past. My point is, this feels like a game, not that there aren't that many for Indiana with the way that defense is built, but this feels like a game where if Indiana's pass rush is really tuned up, Indiana's going to have a good chance to make some plays.
Yeah, and I thought, and we've talked about just it being, a deeper room. Tyreek Tucker is a guy that I don't know if that you expected kind of contributions right off the bat from, and he's got 6 pressures and a couple of sacks. Um, um, working behind James Carpenter, he's been more impactful than CJ West. I thought CJ West, you asked me if he played, he did in against Western Illinois, very quiet 18 snaps. And he hasn't done much, and the defensive tackles have still been really impactful. And you talk about Kamara. One interesting thing about him is he's been lining up a lot on the inside, and they've been kind of rotating him in and out to kind of get good looks, I guess, and try to confuse teams, and it's been really effective. And so they've really used that defensive line. Brian Haynes has as a real weapon, and hasn't had to just blitz to get pressure, and I think that's huge.
Yeah, I wonder on West because I think that's 37 snaps over 2 games for him, and I think we've wondered like is he maybe carrying a small injury they're not mentioning? Is he not quite as game ready as they want. I do wonder a little bit too if that's the sort of position you keep on a snap count in games like that, because you can put a player like Tyreek Tucker, who needs the snaps anyway. He's still going to have a physical and athletic advantage over virtually any offensive lineman that Western Illinois, for example, is putting in front of him. So I wonder a little bit, you know, and then you think about the way they have rotated the running backs, and obviously they've had some success with running back, but that's another position that is obviously very that is obviously, you know, tends to kind of suffer from wear and tear. I just sort of wonder if, you know, whether it's this game, whether it's a Maryland, whatever, if there's an extent to which Indiana is almost looking at someone like CJ West, because the physical ask for a true nose tackle is so big anymore. I wonder if maybe it's almost like he's being sort of kept out of the line of fire a little bit in some of these games. And the idea is that you'll put higher usage on him in the games where, you know, you really need that presence on the interior. Whereas, you know, you're totally fine playing your backup tackles, a backup D end, a freshman somewhere, you know, freshman linebacker, whatever, against Western Illinois. The athletic level, the skill level is still just going to be so dramatically different.
Yeah, and I mean that's possible, but I do think with Cignetti saying that, you know, they early. I mean, I think this was early in the summer, just about getting him in game shape and kind of the physical part. If that was an issue, you'd probably want to get him in the rotation a little more. So I guess we'll see, right? This weekend, what the answer is. But you know, based on how much usage and what kind of snap count he gets, his size alone, I think, makes him unique on the team. You know, I thought he was going to be a real impactful player and has yet to do that. So I mean, I'm interested if he could take a step forward, based on how good this defensive line's already been. It just becomes all that much more imposing.
And that has been, I mean, you know, if we're talking individual position groups, that maybe has been the most encouraging, you know, at least for
Yeah.
me through these first two games. Because we had so many questions about, you know, we sort of said like the first 4 or 5, we thought we had a good idea about. And what's funny is we probably haven't even seen a lot of Jacob Mangum Farrar, who I know you thought Linnell Carr would start. I thought Mangum Farrar would start. We haven't even seen a ton of him. Maybe that's because others are outperforming him. Maybe he's another player that, given his experience and everything, Indiana's happy just kind of, you know, keeping his workload down until they need him. Either way, the point is, you know, Indiana probably entered, you know, let's say kickoff Florida International with 5, maybe 6 guys you'd feel good about on that defensive line. And I think they've already probably added a couple, 3 more to the rotation that have at very least given Brian Haynes, Pat Kuntz, Buda Williams, a certain level of belief that if they were asked to do it on a smaller, you know, volume in, I don't know, the Washington game or the UCLA game or the Maryland game, they could make an impact. Just because, I mean, some of that I guess is probably just opportunity, because there were so few guys there that you felt had sort of a proven track record along the defensive line. But I do think Indiana can look at Marcus Burris, Tyreek Tucker, even Andrew Turvey a little bit, and just sort of say, like, whether it's by design or not, these guys have developed a little bit more depth than maybe what we thought Indiana had on the line. I don't know.
You muted. Did you mute yourself at the end of your sentence?
I did. I didn't mean to. I was going for the mute button and I was trying to transition right out. It's good to mute yourself when you do this so that any background noise doesn't come through. But you know,
But
I jumped the gun.
you've muted yourself. So now I don't know what the end of your point was. You could have. It's what was the last word you said?
I don't remember. You just got to figure it out. You're gonna have to wing it. I had to vamp on this podcast for like 5 minutes last time while you set your Comcast router.
That's like
So
the Kurt Signetti's answer about the crowd. Made oh, the crowd on his coach's show where he went like 300 or 400 words, and at the end he's just like baby steps. So I'm assuming you said baby steps.
baby steps.
Baby steps. Yes. Yeah. I mean, what you said is I think it's you know, what was one of the bigger question marks, and now it's one of the. It's been through 2 games, one of their bigger strengths. So, you know, I think that it's, and we got to see it against Big Ten competition. And we keep saying that, and I think, you know, this whole team has got a lot to prove, you know, these upcoming weeks, these upcoming games. Obviously, Charlotte's sort of an exception. But these are sort of what the measuring stick games, essentially, where I don't think people are going to believe in Indiana nationally at all until you see some of these JMU guys do that against.
They got one vote. They got one vote in the, I think it was the AP poll. Do you want me to go find out who it was?
I didn't think they did they?
Was it the coaches poll? It might have been the coaches poll where they got a vote.
I didn't
They
think
got
they
a vote
got
in one of the polls. You keep talking, I'll go find it.
Oh, now I have to vamp now to as well. You figure this out. Which they don't say which coach though, right? They don't give coaches ballots.
They only released the last ballot of the year for the coaches poll. Isn't that right? They released, like, I think it's the final ballot is the one they released.
Can Kurt Signetti vote for his own team?
He's a voter, isn't he?
I'm but asking, can you vote for your? I mean, like,
I can't remember if there's a rule against that or not, to be honest.
Because like, wouldn't that be like the obvious culprit, or was it Western Illinois? No, Western Illinois.
I don't think he would have a vote. All right, I'm looking this up. Vamp.
You were sitting back. How are you looking it up? You weren't even at your keyboard. You're moving very slow. It looks like. Are you even typing?
Vamp.
I am vamping. I'm talking about you. I'm describing. Well, this gets put online for video. People can watch this excellent exchange here. I've got nothing to vamp. What are we doing? Oh,
You are horrible at this. I did 5 minutes, probably more than that, probably 7 minutes. All right, hold on. I'm on the AP poll. It must have been the coaches poll because Indiana's got no AP votes.
I told you it was the coaches poll.
Who votes in the coaches poll?
I mean, coaches.
No, but I'm saying who are the voters in the coaches poll? Let's see. Let's see who we got here.
You're going to go through
all. We're doing this live. Does Kurt Signetti vote in the coach? See, Kurt Signetti does not have a vote, so he didn't vote for himself. Does Mike McIntyre have a vote? Mike McIntyre has a vote.
There you go.
Florida International.
Have we figured it out?
Maybe that's who did it. I think they only published the last Indiana and James Madison each got one vote. So they split the Signetti ticket.
Which one was higher up, though? That's the question. We'll never.
Well, James Madison's higher up, but it's reversed alphabetical order. Tulane got one vote, James Madison got one vote, Indiana got one vote, but it goes TJI.
There you go.
I don't know. That's all I got.
So, I mean, we've talked about the importance. Do you have a prediction, or you did preseason predictions?
I think I had them winning this game by 6. I mean, what's the line? Has it moved at all?
It was opened at 3.
This is just a lot of on-air admin today. Action Network.
It's still
Action Network has Indiana -1.5.
That's garbage.
Or no, excuse me. Action Network has them opening at 1.5. The spread is now -3.
It opened at -3, and it's at -3 at all the major sports books. Go to VegasInsider.com and list them all.
All the major sports books. How much time do you spend on the major sports books?
A lot of time.
A lot of time. No, I mean, listen, Kirk Signetti himself, like I have, it's funny because he doesn't give us a lot of the time, but he is like willing to acknowledge the elephant in the room more than most coaches. Like when he talked about, like, we're just fighting human nature this week. He didn't try to like put on some show that Western Illinois was, gonna make it difficult with their 4-3 or the way they blitzed or whatever. He was just like, listen, we should beat this team. We've just got to be better than this team. On Monday, he said basically something to the effect of, we've won 3 Big Ten games in 3 years, and yet we're favored in this game. So, like, we've got, I think his message was, we've got to square that circle within ourselves and just ignore whatever's going on outside. And actually, I think, I remember, and it's hard to quantify this, but like, I remember talking to people about Signetti when Indiana hired him. And the one thing everyone seemed to think he was very good at was keeping his team focused and like helping his team with sort of the mental process of just like block this out. And I don't think there's, it's not the old Nick Saban rat poison thing, maybe necessarily, but it was just interesting that he was kind of willing to acknowledge, like, we're favored in this game, despite the fact that, haven't won a lot of Big Ten games, period, in the last few years. We got to go prove ourselves. We got to go prove that we're capable of this. I mean, I would probably pick Indiana to win. I did in the preseason, and it's hard for me to look at the way UCLA played against a Hawaii team that I don't necessarily think is that good, and um, and think that Indiana can win. I know it's the Rose Bowl, but the Rose Bowl doesn't tend to be like a home atmosphere of any real description for UCLA. If anything, I wouldn't be shocked if there's a decent amount of noise when Indiana has the ball out there, because I think you're going to see, and I think it's going to be true for a lot of Big Ten programs, but I think you're going to see a lot of Indiana fans there because it's the Rose Bowl. It's the first, it's a chance to go watch Indiana at the Rose Bowl, first time since they joined the conference, whatever. I wouldn't predict Indiana to win by 20 or anything, but I mean, I don't know about you. I would not be stunned if Indiana won this game at all. I picked them in the preseason, and nothing I've seen thus far has kind of dissuaded me from that notion.
Yeah, I think they're in a good position to win. I guess I'd frame it like that. How much is it? Just a touchdown. I'm interested to see how this offense does, frankly, against a defense that's had success in recent years and kind of carried over the system. I mean, obviously a lot of new players, but we've said how well this month sets up for them. That you could easily see them being 4-0 going into the Maryland game, and I think that's what they're going to be. I mean, they've played better than I think anybody thought they would through the first 2 weeks, and that's encouraging. And now we'll see if they're for real, but I do think that they've answered a lot of the questions that people had about them.
I also think, I mean, it feels like they have to win at least one of UCLA or Maryland to really feel like they're because we talked about this so much, but the schedule gets like progressively harder. Nebraska looks, like, I don't say the real deal. Let's not get out over our skis about Nebraska football. We've been guilty of that as a general rule for a while, but that looks like it will be a difficult game at home. Michigan State picks up a nice road win at Maryland over the weekend. You get the sense that maybe Jonathan Smith has got things kind of a little bit ahead of schedule there. Let's just kind of assume that Michigan has righted the ship somewhat by the time Indiana plays them in week 10. Then you've got Ohio State. The point is the schedule gets progressively tougher. It does feel like if Indiana is going to take advantage of, a favorable schedule in the broad sense, they've got to really generate some momentum and keep the wind in their sails. And I think beating Maryland at home would do that to an extent. But frankly, in a weird way, I think UCLA winning on the road, winning at the Rose Bowl, and giving yourself the opportunity to beat Charlotte to go 4-0, like that feels like the optimal scenario, in the sense that I actually think, in a weird way, Indiana would be better off at 4-1 having lost to Maryland than it would be at 4-1 having lost to UCLA. Does that make any sense? And that's not necessarily a reflection of like what I think of those teams, more so the complexion of the way the season would feel like it was flowing in a certain
You had them
sense.
winning 9 games. Who did you have them beating in the Big Ten?
I had them winning the UCLA game, the Maryland game, the Nebraska game, the Washington game, and the Purdue game.
Not Northwestern?
No, I felt like Indiana. My reasoning on this, and I don't remember if we talked about this in the podcast or not. My reasoning on this was basically that they should go 3-0 in the non-conference, and that I thought they had a better combination of sort of, proven commodity at coach and quarterback than UCLA, maybe Purdue, but the Purdue game was also in Bloomington. So I basically just said, I think they probably had the advantage at coach and possibly at quarterback in the UCLA game. I think the Purdue game might be a little closer, but that game's also in Bloomington. So, you just sort of tilt toward the home team. That left me with Northwestern, Nebraska, Washington, and Michigan State, because I also pushed Ohio State and Michigan to one side, or it's Maryland, Northwestern, Nebraska, Washington, Michigan State. And I kind of cut both ways on that. I could have given you reasons why I would shade Indiana in each of those matchups, and I could give you reasons why I shaded the other team in each of those matchups. And basically what I came down to was just giving them the home games and picking against them on the road games. And it's 50-50 because Nebraska looks better. And I wasn't I'm not shocked by that. I know there were people in Lincoln that really believed in Dylan Raiola. He was a 5-star talent. It's not surprising. On the other hand, like Indiana's going to get Michigan State at the end of a brutal stretch for Michigan State. Like they may seriously have lost 4 or 5, even having won the Maryland game this weekend, they may seriously have lost 4 or 5 in a row by the time Indiana plays them in November. So, I mean, I basically just fell out toward giving them the home games, and so I picked them 8-4 in the regular season, and then just kind of gave them bowl win because who knows what bowl games are such a movable feast. But I had them winning this game because I just felt like you've got a much more. I don't know if Sean Foster's a better coach than Kurt Cignetti or not, but Cignetti's certainly a much more experienced coach. I think Curtis Rourke's probably the better quarterback. Everything I understand from talking to people in the Pac-12 is the Rose Bowl is not really a home environment for UCLA very often. So that's why I had them winning this game. But I only had them winning, I think, by 6. So it wasn't like I didn't say Indiana was going to go out there and win by 3 scores.
Well, Northwestern's already changed quarterbacks too. So
Are they going back to Helinski?
Yeah. So they got if Nebraska and Indiana are each 6-0 on October 19th. Are we penciling in game day for a visit to Bloomington?
I mean, maybe more like Fox Big Noon Saturday. I think that might be more likely.
That's a real drop off, I feel like.
Yeah. But we'll see.
We'll
leave it there. He's Mike Niziolek. You'll be out there this weekend. I will not. So follow him for all South Beach. No, not South Beach. What was I about to say? Not South Beach. What's the famous beach in LA? I don't know. I've lost it. It's gone. It's gone. Malibu. Go skiing in the mountains and swimming in the ocean on the same day, Mike. That's your charge for this weekend.
I'll be in Miami.
Just covering the IU game. IU UCLA.
He'll be covering the UCLA game in Miami, as one does.
He's Mike Niziolek. I'm Zach Osterman, the Herald Times, the Indianapolis Star. This has been Mind Your Banners for September 10th, 2024. Thank you so much for listening. We will talk to you soon.